My name is Tine, and I am an entrepreneur. And there is a great advantage in being an entrepreneur, and that is that you get to be surrounded by some of all the new stuff that happens all the time. Because there is a lot happening, and I know it's almost like a full-time job to try to stay on top of it, isn't it? But luckily, in the job that I am in, all of these new technologies and all of this innovation kind of comes to me a little bit. So I have a great advantage in being able to see what's happening and what's coming up. So when I was out on this journey and trying to figure out what do I really think that's most important with the digital future, I tried to also ask some of these innovators and entrepreneurs that surround us. And I asked 100 of them, what does the digital future mean to you? And these are technologists and they're digitalists and they're people that work with this. And the most frivolous, so to say, of them, they said maybe it's flying cars. And if it's flying cars, then of course the digital future is already here, right? So I have two friends, for example. One is already building a car that can turn into an airplane. So if you need that, you can just take off if there's a queue on the motorway. Would we like that? I would like that. And actually says the flying part is not the hard part. The hard part is to get something that can fly, to get permission to drive on the roads, because there's a lot of legislation about that. So the flying is easy. I have another friend that builds drones, taxi drones, so that you can be airlifted from one place to another into the other one. And that also sounds like the future, right? But they're testing that in November in Dubai. So that part of the future is also already here. I think the most serious of the people that I spoke to about what is the digital future, they looked at it from another perspective. And they said, the digital future has nothing to do with digital. It's not technology. It's about humanity. It's about what is it that happens when we mix all of this technology with the way that we live and the way that we want to live. And what is going to happen. And I would say, like, broadly speaking, this can go two ways, right? This is the first way. I call it zombie apocalypse, right? It rings a little bit of the sci-fi movies and the action films that we've had the pleasure of seeing courtesy of Hollywood. But you get an idea of what I mean with this when you see this picture, don't you? A lot of the population is very worried about that. People are quite scared that the future is going to be a place where there is surveillance, where people can check where you are all the time, where democracy is going to be undermined, where quantum computing and artificial intelligence means that computers are more intelligent than humans, and they will develop a self-consciousness and they will turn against us. Have you heard about that one? There are a lot of people who are very afraid of that. And a lot of the people who are not working within technology, the further you get from working with this, the more afraid of this you get. And I can understand that it's a scary picture. 30% of people under 30 today already have a sticker over the camera on their computer when they're not using it. Because they are already, 30% of young people today are already worried that the camera in their computer is being used to spy on them when they're not using it. There is another alternative, of course, and that is that humans use technology to upgrade our operating system. So as you can see here, you know, to speak a little bit geekily, this woman here has an operating system down on the tip of one of her legs. And there's a lot of work happening there, right? Where we're using technology to see how we can improve ourselves as a species. And I think that's quite easy to imagine. Like, imagine that we all had several sets of legs, and then depending on the purpose, we could put on the ones that were most suitable. Like, for example, rather than needing to buy a bike, then maybe you had a set that had wheels, and maybe you could power those a little bit. And then we also don't have the problem with all the car parks needed and all the heavy traffic, because we'd all put on our wheels. Maybe you had some for hiking in the mountains. Maybe you had a set for when you were going running. I mean, our physical setup here is not that impressive, actually. It's very easy to imagine that we can improve on it with a little bit of technology. I mean, I don't know how fast you run, but definitely my running speed could be improved, I think, with even just a little bit of technology. When I was looking into this, I found all these fascinating things. One of the things I found was new sort of contact lenses that have been developed that reach your blood pressure. your blood sugar. So that imagine that you have diabetes or you are in the zone for maybe developing diabetes, which is about half the world's population right now. Then with a slightly change in color in your contact lens, you can see that now you have to be careful about what you eat, or now you have to take your insulin. Lots of little hacks that we can use to improve. But all of these things have the thing in common that they're focusing what you could call the hardware of humanity. Our bodies, right? And yes, there are certainly things that we need to fix within the hardware of humanity. But when I was looking into this, I'm realizing that maybe there's other parts that we need to fix. Maybe humanity actually has bigger problems than the setup we're in. And I want to just take you through some of this. I will give you a warning. This is going to be a little bit depressing. Can you deal with 3 minutes of depression? Yes? Okay. Here are some of the stats that I just picked up looking at how is humanity actually doing right now as the smartest and dominant race on planet Earth. There's a couple of things that is not that impressive. One is, if we start looking at wars, the wars have been growing with 350%. And we're spending about 13% of the world's GDP. There's about 30 million people living in slavery. Are you aware of that? Or 40 million people, actually. 1 in 3 women, during the space of their life, is going to experience some sort of sexual or domestic abuse. 1 in 3. Slavery is growing with 30%. You know, that's numbers I would be very happy to report to my shareholders when we grow 30%, but not something that I'm very proud of as a human to report that one of the biggest embarrassments of humanity is growing with that kind of rate. If we start looking at greed, we can see a lot of it is fueled by corruption, it is fueled by greed. And we can also see that if we're looking on the planet, that air pollution already now is costing us 5 trillion a year, and almost 30% of young kids in the planet are dying because of pollution. So I think apart from the hardware setup, there's a couple of things. There's another couple of stuff I just wanted to bring by while we're at it, right? So because we're having all these problems with the planet, of course we're getting a refugee crisis. Right now, there's been quite a lot of debate in Europe about this refugee crisis. I am Danish, and it's like almost torn the country apart with how much we should close the borders and build walls. And you got a little bit of water between Norway and the rest of Europe, but I'm sure the debate has made it up here too. These kind of problems, of course, are only going to get worse the more we are leaving land in a condition that's impossible to live in. Right now, we have 21 million people that are refugees because of something that's climate related. And we have almost 800 million people that are suffering from chronic malnourishment, of course also to do with the condition of the planet. 30 million people are going to die of malnutrition or starvation this year. That's 100,000 people a day. So I was quite shocked when I started looking into all of this. So I knew that, we had some challenges at hand. But like most entrepreneurs, I'm an optimist, and maybe I'm noticing the good news more than the worst. But were you aware that it was this bad? Are these numbers bigger than you thought? They're much bigger, and they're much bigger than I thought. We are expecting that half the population is going to be clinically obese by 2030. And we are expecting that cancer rate is going to grow with 70% over the next 2 decades. But are we spending all of our attention and energy on it? Do we know what we are going to do, and are we fixing it? Not so much. What we are doing is we have an all-time record in movies, in cars, in online shopping, and in buying of guns. So what I want us to talk about today is this. I think we have a software problem. I think that the biggest problem that humanity is facing in the digital future is not this. This we are going to be able to figure out. This is engineering. This, however, is the big question. How can we get people to make better decisions? We are already equipped with quite an impressive cognitive function. But it appears to me that we're not using it very responsibly. So, if we dive into that, then the talk about the digital future is about something else, right? It's not about technology, and it's not about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or about synthetic biology or any of that. It's about stuff like freedom and democracy. It's about what happens to all of these when we merge them with technologies. So if we look, for example, at freedom and democracy, what kind of an impact does it have on these when social media determines what kind of news you read? For how many people, how many of you are social media a significant source of selecting the news articles that you read? It is for almost all of us. And what is it that social media is brilliant at? It is brilliant at already knowing exactly what we like and what we believe in, and then feeding us that. There was a very fascinating experiment with an American journalist who was a Democrat, and then in order to see how manipulated he was being by social media, in this case Facebook, he started, instead of saying like to all the Democrat stuff, he stopped doing that, and then he started liking stuff that was Republican. And over the course of a couple of weeks, his Facebook feed started going from pictures of Obama, you know, being the strong man, maybe with a baby and a fireman helmet, to Obama who was like tripping down on stage or looking ridiculous or picking his nose or doing all sorts of ridiculous stuff. At the same time, the pictures of Trumps that I get in my feed, where he's like, it normally looks something like this, like, and his hair is weird and he looks like abusive, and all of those pictures started changing slowly into articles and pictures that showed Trump as quite the man. And to me, that is very scary, because it means that now when we are arguing from what we individually believe to be a position of fact, that our facts totally differ. So no wonder we can't agree. In exactly the same way that we know that humans don't see colors the same way, now we're not going to see news the same way, because we're not getting the same news anymore. How does that impact how you vote? You guys just had an election here. How much of that is impacted on that you're being fed an echo chamber of what you already want to hear? It means that we have no idea what's really happening in the world, right? We only know what happens in the world we already want to belong to. There are other problems like that with surveillance that will make us worried about the government. There's areas where we feel that we've lost trust in it. All of these are perpetuated by hacking attacks, by leaking of documents, by all of these things that are caused by technology. So I would argue that technology, unless we manage to deal with it, has a very big, potentially very dangerous impact on freedom and democracy. I would argue the same with education. So on the one hand, technology can be the great liberating factor here, right? Technology can mean that what if the next Einstein is born in Svalbard? What is the chances that his school science teacher is going to be a world-class scientist that is going to bring him up into the world elite? So I have to admit I've never been to Svalbard, but I would statistically consider it quite a small chance. The internet, however, what is the chance that if this kid finds the right online forum on the internet, that he can be brought up into the world elite? Much bigger. So Elon Musk just set aside $15 million as an X prize for people who can bring quality education to 250 million children in Africa. So in this case, if we do it well, technology can be a great liberating factor. I've always thought that we manage technology in education in a bizarre way, like, what is it with that kids that can't sit still for 7 hours listening to something that in a method of teaching that we haven't changed since the Romans? What are the chances that if those kids can't sit still, we give them a diagnosis? This kid has ADHD. No, maybe that kid is just bored. I was bored. Were you bored? In about half of the topics, I was bored senseless, and in the other half, I couldn't keep up. And that is some of the things that technology can do, right? We can differentiate and make sure that I get the kind of questions that I need in math, and maybe on math I'm on this level, and in English I'm on this level, or the other way around. So that can be a great liberating factor here, if we use it correctly. it can also be done that in terms of dignity. One of the things that I am fascinated and appalled by is how people behave online. Have you seen right now there's a video going on the internet, American campaign that reads out the comments where two people are speaking to each other. Because have you seen how people speak to each other in the comment tracks? Would you talk like that to your colleague? No, but something bizarre happens in people's heads when it's online, and all of a sudden we feel like, oh, that's totally normal to call someone, a slut, and that it's like, well, I can't even say it, obviously, especially not this being filmed. But people are losing all sorts of manners and all sorts of politeness when we go online. And that kind of bullying that you could be really unlucky to experience at school, well, now that stretches everywhere if you have a device. So how many people were parents again? Now half of your responsibility is going to be to teach your kids how to behave and how to protect themselves online. Are you spending half of your time bringing up your kids in the digital world? Of course you are. Do you have any idea what happens in your kids' digital life? Of course not. What's the last thing they want? It's their parents to see what they're doing, right? I saw a stat that teenage girls sends 220 chat messages a day. I mean, you would have to quit your job to keep up with what your daughter is texting. But joking aside, right, this is like a whole new side of society and of education that we don't even know how to deal with. But it is going to be determining whether it's possible to have dignity in this new world. So we've agreed that this is important, right? Can we agree on that? Yes. But how are we going to do that? Well, this is the good part of it, because there are some things we can do. The very first thing that we can do is very easy, is we can stop being complacent. Do you know that story of you take two kids, and it's the same girl, aged 5, and on one of the experiments, she is dirty and she is in old clothes. And you put her on the street, and then you try to see how long does it take before someone comes up and asks this kid if they're okay. And then you do the same experiment just a little bit later with the same girl, but clean and well-dressed. First of all, it is shocking, but not surprising, how few people go over and ask the dirty girl if she is okay. I mean, the dirty girl could be a totally normal kid that was just lost. And even if he isn't a totally normal kid, but is in fact a poor kid, does that mean we shouldn't go up and ask if she's okay? Of course not. But what happens, regardless of whether this looks like a rich kid or a poor kid, is that if the first two people walk past, no one is going to stop. And with everything in life, it works like that. If next time a colleague is rude to another colleague, if the first two people that hear that don't speak up, everyone else in the room is going to accept that this is socially acceptable. Every time we buy something from a company that we know uses child labor in Africa, or that this is going to pollute rivers, or this, every time we do that, we are also sending a signal to all the people around us that this is okay. So the only thing we really need to do in order to change this is to stop being complacent and stop saying this is not my responsibility and it's not my fault. The good news. Now we're ready for some good news, right? Was that a bit depressing? Yes, I know. Okay, should we do some happy stuff now? Yes, let's shift to some happy stuff. Okay, the good news is more people care about this than you think. So normally one of the reasons we don't do anything is we feel like we're the only person that cares, right? It feels like no one else does anything. But when you get to work in a space like a lot of us do, like with new companies, with entrepreneurs, you notice that there are a lot of people that care. There's also all of the people who've chosen a profession that makes a difference, like all the firemen and the policemen do make a difference. All the people across the world that volunteer, all the people that donate to charity, all the people that have decided to eat a little bit less meat, all the people that are trying to buy organic products, all of the people that are trying to be nice to their neighbors and visit their grandmother so she doesn't sit all alone. And we can continue this list, and at some point, if it isn't already you, it will become you. So a lot of people care. We just need to acknowledge that and realize that we are not alone about it. There is actually a lot more people who care than people who don't care. So I don't understand why we're letting the other people win. I mean, you could almost say this a little bit undemocratic. The other good news is that incumbent domination has weakened. So incumbents means that the people that are already in power stay in power. So it used to be in the way that if you made it to the Fortune 500, so that's the list of the 500 biggest companies in the States, then you were there for 75 years. I mean, that's a lifetime, right? 75 years. Today, if you make it to the Fortune 500, you're going to be there for 15 years. That's nothing, right? That means that a lot of companies now that we can't even imagine are not there, like Coca-Cola or Statoil, they're going to be gone in 15 years, and they're going to be replaced by something else. And maybe they're going to be replaced by companies like this. So I've put on some logos here, and you can probably recognize some of them, yes? What's interesting here is not how big these companies have become, because they have been huge. They have become huge, but companies have always become huge. I put in Volvo here to have like a little Scandinavian representative here. They're worth $45 billion. I think 45 billion is also an okay bit of money, don't you think? If it was your company, would it be okay if it was worth $45 billion? I think it's all right. Some of the other ones, of course, are enormous. I mean, somewhere over here, between Google and Apple, is the Swedish GDP, right? So Apple is worth considerably more than Sweden. I mean, I'm Danish and you're Norwegian, so we don't mind that. But unfortunately, we are all worth less than the Swedes. So let's just use them as an example, right? What's fascinating in this story isn't that these companies are worth a lot, it's the speed of it. Facebook grew 4,500% faster than Volvo. So right now, we have something that's happened for the first time ever in history, and that is that it is faster for small companies to take over big companies. And that means that all the change we want in society and all of this, like fixing our software as well as fixing our hardware, is actually realistic to get in. Because it's only going to take 15 years to kick out all the mastodons that are on top of the Fortune 500 now. And you all put your hands up that you are going to live the next 30. So we have time to do this twice, minimum. It is actually, historically, it's always been the way that it is small groups that drive change. And this, of course, is a demonstration. We don't demonstrate much in the Nordics, right? We are much too well behaved. And that's also not necessary. There are many other ways. But whether it is small sports teams that break world records, whether it's small teams of scientists that make medical breakthroughs, whether it's small groups of businesses that change the way that things are done, all human progress is always done in small units. I had the pleasure of meeting the guy that's the CTO of Amazon. So Amazon has about 260,000 staff. I can't even imagine how you organize that many people. And he said, well, that's very easy. We'll put them into small teams. So even the mastodons have recognized this, and that means, again, that there is a chance for changing the way that we do stuff, right? If all it takes is small groups, ideally they say up to 12 people. In Amazon, he says that we make them no bigger than they can share a pizza. You know, this guy's like one of the smartest guys on the planet. I was expecting something enormously scientific, and then he gives me a pizza rule. But that's what he says. Once they get to a site that they can't share a pizza, we split them into two. By the way, I don't know any Americans where 12 Americans can share one pizza, but I'll just bring that up to his attention next time I see him. But all of this matters. I'm talking about all of this stuff with the small teams and all of that, because in the future, it's not going to be our superior intellect that defines our superiority anymore. It was when we were competing with these guys, right? I mean, that was a great competitor, this one. You know, like we don't have to get up that early and we don't have to run that fast to be smarter than this one. But in the future, it's not going to be like that. So what's going to define us in the future is going to be this. Our morality. It is going to be whether we choose the right things or the wrong things. That essentially is the only thing that humans can do that no one else on the planet can, right? Humans are the only ones that thinks about the difference between right and wrong. We're the only ones that have that ability. That we're not using it very frequently is something that we're here to discuss, right? But we have the ability. So all of these people have something in common, and that is that during their lifetime, they were incredibly unpopular and did something incredibly different. And for some of them, Edward Snowden, for example, is a hero, and for other people, Edward Snowden is a villain. But what he has done is that he has thought differently, and that's what the topic is for the talk we're having right now. He has dared to think differently and to do something that is quite brave, because it is a little bit unpopular initially to change that. And now when we are going to go out, this little group of people, we can go out and change the software of people, and it's going to be a little bit unpopular in the beginning. I'm going to just warn you of that. But we can all decide that. We can't all be Einstein, right? I certainly we're not going to be able to be Einstein. But we can all decide to spend our time on something that matters. And I had an app, like a little mobile company that was doing really well. We raised 2 rounds of capitals, and we got the product was used in 130 countries. But essentially it served the problem of we can take you to a restaurant that's a slightly better match for the kind of restaurant you like. And while I think that wine bars are quite important, I realize it's not perhaps the biggest problem for humanity that we were solving. So now I decided to switch into another line of business, and that is that all of these people that think a little bit different, they need to be put together so we can create these echo chambers of this is possible, and this we dare, and this we will do. So today, I build networks and I build spaces where people that are creators and change makers and underdogs and do things differently can get together. Because I realized that that's what's going to fuel that we can make the world into a place where our kids can also live. And we can all make those little bit of differences that mean that we just push a little bit. So I think that the kind of people that are in this room are exactly the kind of people that are thinking differently, even because for the mere fact that we have turned up to something like what we're doing today. And I think that this is exactly the type of tech-critical citizen that we need to start slowly eating a little bit differently, voting a little bit differently, buying a little bit differently, programming and spending our energy. Have you ever heard the quote that Silicon Valley is the biggest waste of talent on the planet? Well, it is true. And one of the things that we are much stronger at in the Nordic is that we have a stronger moral compass and a lot of people care more. So we should not become the next Silicon Valley. We should be a region that builds important stuff that also makes a difference. Because there are a lot of people all over the world that build crappy apps to find nicer restaurants like I did. And if we take all of those people and then use all of that effort building something that matters, we're going to have a different kind of world. And I want to finish just with this one here. And this is a quote from a guy called Phil that created a company called Evernote. And he says, "I don't know why we call them hard decisions. Because these decisions are not hard." Remember the last hard decision you had? They're not hard, these decisions. We know exactly, instinctively, immediately what the right decision is. It's a tough decision, and sometimes they are very unpleasant. But that's not the same as hard. We already know exactly what we are supposed to do. So the future is ours to form, and I think that we should make it better than the past. Are you in? Let's do that. Thank you.